Video sweeping social media. Is that really Elvis Presley? The tall man with white hair, a white beard, and dark sunglasses? Yes, the truth is getting out. Elvis is alive.
In 1977, late one night in Memphis, a tour manager quietly started a tape recorder while Elvis Presley spoke to his closest friends. The recording was never released. Nobody knew about it. Now, decades later, people are hearing it for the first time. And what they hear changes everything. What was Elvis so afraid of? And who was he trying to warn? This tape raises more questions than answers. The tape that suddenly surfaced. This year, without warning or media buildup, a cassette tape from 1977 appeared in the hands of archivists who were sorting through storage units belonging to Elvis Presley's former tour staff. And no one expected it to contain anything unusual, just another forgotten relic from a career already documented beyond measure. But when the tape was digitized and played for the first time in nearly 50 years, the people in the room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with respect or nostalgia. The recording quality is poor, muffled in places, with background noise that suggests it was made late at night in a private room. Not a studio, not a stage. And the voice on the tape is unmistakably Elvis, but it does not sound like any version of him the public has ever heard. No charm, no humor, no performance, just a man speaking in a low and careful tone to people he trusts, or at least people he hopes he can trust. Listeners who were brought in to verify the tape said they felt uncomfortable within minutes, not because of what Elvis says directly, but because of how he says it. The pauses that stretch too long, the sentences that stop halfway, the sense that he is choosing every word with the kind of caution usually reserved for confessions or warnings, and by the time the tape ends, no one in the room is sure what they have just heard, only that it does not fit the story they thought they knew. The tape was never meant to be released, never cataloged, never mentioned in any official Elvis archive, and the fact that it exists at all raises questions that make people uneasy. Questions about why it was hidden, who knew about it, and what Elvis was trying to say before he ran out of time. Historians who specialize in Elvis's final years admit they had never heard of this recording before, which is unusual given how thoroughly his life has been studied, documented, and dissected by fans, scholars, and investigators. And when pressed, a few former associates quietly acknowledge they knew the tape existed but chose never to speak about it, not out of loyalty, but out of something closer to fear. The tour manager who made the recording never released it publicly, never sold it, never even mentioned it in interviews. And after his death, the tape sat in storage with no label, no description, just a date scrawled on the case in faded ink. And his family, when asked, said they were told the tape contained private conversations that were not meant for anyone outside the room where they were spoken. Some believe the tape was kept hidden because it contradicted the careful image Elvis's estate wanted to preserve. The legend of a man undone by fame and excess, but not by anything darker. And releasing a recording where Elvis sounds genuinely afraid, where he hints at involvement with powerful people and situations he could not control, would have opened doors no one wanted opened, especially not in the years immediately following his death, when investigations and rumors were already circulating. Others suggest the tape stayed buried because those who heard it understood that certain truths do not bring clarity, they bring consequences. And Elvis himself seems to know this on the recording, warning his friends to stay quiet, to protect themselves, to remember that some questions are better left unanswered, and for decades, that is exactly what happened until now. Elvis Presley's words to the Memphis Mafia. The tape does not begin with introductions or context. It starts in the middle of something already heavy, already understood by everyone in the room, and within the first minute, listeners realize this is not a recording meant for the public, not a message to fans or a statement for history. This is Elvis talking directly to the Memphis Mafia, the men who traveled with him, lived with him, protected him from the world outside Graceland's gates. His voice moves through the room with a tone people who study Elvis have never heard in any other recording. Not the smooth, confident drawl from interviews, not the playful banter caught backstage, not even the exhausted rambling from his final concerts. This is different, quieter, more deliberate, like a man who has rehearsed what he needs to say, but is still unsure how much he should reveal. And the Memphis Mafia, usually loud and joking even in private moments, are completely silent, letting him speak without interruption. Experts who have listened to the tape point out how often Elvis uses the word you instead of addressing anyone by name, as if he wants to keep the conversation general, as if naming people might make the moment too specific, too traceable. And this small detail adds to the unsettling feeling that he is not just talking to his friends, he is protecting them, or trying to, by keeping certain things vague enough to deny later if necessary. There are no distractions on the tape, no music playing in the background, no television murmuring from another room, just the faint creak of furniture and the occasional rustle of movement. And listeners say, this silence makes every word feel heavier, makes every pause feel intentional, as though Elvis knows the tape is rolling and is choosing carefully what will be preserved and what will remain unspoken. By the third minute, it becomes clear that this is not a casual late-night conversation. This is something Elvis has been holding inside for a long time, something he can no longer carry alone, and the men around him seem to understand this without needing it explained, their silence not just respectful, but tense, waiting for him to finally say what they have all been afraid to ask. A voice full of fear. Within minutes of listening, people notice something unsettling in Elvis's voice. Not anger, not sadness, not the kind of emotional weight that comes from heartbreak or regret, but fear. Genuine and unfiltered, the kind that makes a person's words come out uneven, stopping and starting as if each sentence requires effort to push through. And this is not the voice of a man performing vulnerability. This is the voice of someone who has run out of places to hide what he is feeling. He does not try to soften it or disguise it behind humor the way he often did in public. He admits it plainly, telling the Memphis Mafia that he is scared, that he does not feel safe anymore, that something has changed in his life and he does not know how to undo it. And the way he says these things, with long pauses between thoughts, suggests he is speaking carefully, aware that even in this private room with trusted men, there are limits to what he can say out loud. Psychologists who have analyzed the recording point to specific moments where Elvis's breathing becomes audible, where his voice drops so low the tape barely captures it, where he seems lost mid-sentence and then forces himself to continue. And these are not signs of confusion or intoxication, but signs of psychological pressure. And the fear in his voice does not sound exaggerated or dramatic. It sounds exhausted, like something he has been carrying for so long that it has worn him down to nothing. Listeners also notice that Elvis does not ask for reassurance. He does not look for comfort or tell his friends that everything will be fine. He simply states the fear as a fact, something that exists whether he acknowledges it or not. And this refusal to soften the reality makes the tape even more disturbing because it suggests he has already accepted that the danger is real, that the situation is beyond his control. Strange hints about powerful people. As the tape continues, Elvis begins to speak about things that do not fit the familiar story of his life. Not music, not movies, not the pressures of fame, but something else. Something he describes in fragments and half-finished thoughts. And he tells the Memphis Mafia that his fame made him useful to people outside the entertainment industry. People who saw opportunities in his access, his mobility, his ability to move through spaces without suspicion. And the way he talks about this suggests it was not something he sought out, but something that found him. He mentions meetings that were not about concerts or contracts, favors he was asked to do that had nothing to do with performing, and he uses language that feels deliberately vague, saying things like, they needed someone who could travel, and I was in places most people couldn't get into. And listeners who have studied intelligence operations and Cold War-era politics immediately recognize the tone, the careful avoidance of specifics, the hints at cooperation without ever naming who was involved or what was asked of him. Historians who have listened to the tape say this section is the most disturbing, not because it proves anything concrete, but because it reframes Elvis's entire final decade, the relentless touring, the paranoia, the obsession with law enforcement and federal badges. The way he seemed to trust certain officials more than his own management, and suddenly, these details take on a different weight. A darker possibility that he was not just a famous man spiraling out of control, but a man caught in something he could not escape. At one point on the tape, Elvis's voice drops even lower, and he tells the Memphis Mafia something that makes the room feel colder. He says he did things he cannot explain, not because he does not remember, but because explaining would put everyone in danger, and the way he phrases it suggests these were not mistakes or regrets in the usual sense, not personal failures or moral lapses, but actions taken under pressure, under instruction, under circumstances where refusal was not an option. He hints at moving information, not money, not anything tangible that could be easily traced, but something quieter, something that required discretion and trust. And he describes being in situations where he was the only person in the room who did not officially belong there, where his presence was explained away as celebrity access, as harmless fascination with law enforcement or politics. But the reality, he suggests, was more calculated, more deliberate, and he was aware of it even as it was happening. Elvis says he was trusted because no one would suspect him, because fame provided cover in a way that official channels could not. And he talks about this with kind of bitter clarity, as if he has spent years thinking about how he was used, how his image as an unthreatening patriotic entertainer made him the perfect person to carry messages, to observe, to be present in places where questions would be asked if anyone else had appeared. Experts in covert operations have noted that this kind of unofficial cooperation was not uncommon during the Cold War, when intelligence agencies would use celebrities, journalists, and business people to move through foreign countries or politically sensitive environments without drawing attention. While Elvis never names any agency, never admits to formal involvement, the structure of what he describes matches the pattern of informal asset recruitment, where cooperation is requested rather than demanded, where loyalty is rewarded with access and protection, and where silence is expected in return. The most chilling part of this section is not what Elvis says, but what he stops himself from saying. The moments where he begins a sentence and then cuts it off, where he starts to name a place or a person and then catches himself, and listeners can hear the calculation in those pauses, the awareness that even in this private room, there are lines he cannot cross. Words he stops himself from saying. The most unsettling moments on the tape are not the things Elvis says, but the things he almost says. The sentences that begin with clarity and then dissolve into silence, leaving only the hum of the recorder and the faint sound of breathing. And these pauses happen multiple times throughout the recording, always at moments when it seems he is about to name a specific person, place, or organization. And then something stops him, some internal warning that pulls him back from the edge of revelation. Listeners describe a pattern that emerges after the first few minutes. Elvis will start to explain something, his voice gaining momentum as if he has decided to finally tell the whole truth, and then, mid-sentence, he will stop, sometimes with a sharp intake of breath, sometimes with a quiet curse under his breath. And the silence that follows feels different from a natural pause. It feels like fear, like the sudden realization that speaking certain words out loud could have consequences he is not prepared to face, even here, even now, surrounded by men he has trusted for years. Audio analysts who have studied the tape point to at least 7 distinct moments where this happens, where the sentence structure suggests he was about to provide a name or a location, and then the words simply stop, replaced by silence that stretches for 5, 10, sometimes 15 seconds before he redirects to something safer, something more vague. And in those gaps, listeners can hear shuffling, the creak of a chair, small movements that suggest the men in the room are also feeling the weight of what is not being said. Experts in interrogation and psychological stress recognize this behavior as self-censorship under duress, the kind of editing that happens when someone has been warned, either explicitly or through experience, that certain information is too dangerous to share. And the fact that Elvis exhibits this pattern even in a private recording, even among his closest friends, suggests that the fear is not abstract. It is specific. It is learned. It is the result of knowing what happens when people speak too freely about things they were meant to keep silent. One historian who specializes in Elvis's final years said that listening to these pauses is more disturbing than anything he actually says, because it confirms that Elvis was living with knowledge he could not safely release, that he was caught between the need to tell someone and the terror of what that honesty might cost. And the tape becomes a document not of confession, but of constraint. A man trying to warn his friends without saying enough to endanger them, or himself. The feeling of being watched. Midway through the recording, Elvis shifts from talking about the past to talking about the present, and his tone becomes even more strained, more immediate, as he tells the Memphis Mafia that he feels watched, not in the way celebrities always feel observed by fans or photographers, but in a deeper, more invasive way, the kind of surveillance that follows him into private spaces, into moments where he should be alone. And he says this not as paranoia, not as a vague suspicion, but as a certainty, something he has noticed enough times that it has become part of his daily reality. He describes the feeling of being monitored even at Graceland, even in rooms where no one else is present. And he talks about finding small signs that someone has been through his things. Nothing obvious, nothing he could prove, but enough to make him question whether any space in his life is truly private anymore. And the way he explains this is calm, almost resigned, as if he has already accepted that privacy is something he lost a long time ago and will never get back. Elvis tells his friends that once you are connected to certain people, once you have done favors or carried information or been present in situations that were never supposed to be documented, you do not simply walk away. You remain on a list somewhere, a name in a file, someone who knows too much to be completely forgotten. And he says this with the exhausted clarity of someone who has thought about it often, who has tested the boundaries of his freedom and found them narrower than he expected. The Memphis Mafia remains silent during this part of the tape, and their silence feels heavy, not skeptical, but deeply uncomfortable, as if they do not want to believe what he is saying, but cannot dismiss it either, because they have seen the changes in him, the way he checks windows, the way he lowers his voice even in his own home, the way he has become cautious in ways that do not match the reckless image he projects on stage. Elvis exhibits classic signs of hypervigilance, a state of constant alertness that comes from prolonged stress and the belief that threats are real and ongoing. And while some have tried to attribute this to drug use or mental decline, others argue that the coherence and specificity of his concerns suggests something more grounded, a response not to imagined dangers but to actual experiences of being monitored, reminders that his cooperation, whether willing or coerced, comes with permanent consequences. Warnings that sound like a goodbye. Toward the end of the tape, Elvis's tone shifts again, and he stops talking about himself and starts talking to the Memphis Mafia directly, addressing them not as friends sharing a late-night conversation, but as people he needs to protect. And the warnings he gives are specific enough to feel urgent, but vague enough to avoid naming the exact threats. And this combination makes the entire section feel like a goodbye, like a man preparing his closest friends for a future where he will no longer be able to explain or defend himself. He tells them to be careful after he is gone, not if, but after, as if he has already accepted that his time is limited, that whatever he has been caught up in will not end with a peaceful resolution. And he does not frame this as melodrama or self-pity. He says it plainly, the way someone might give directions or leave instructions for handling affairs. And the men in the room do not interrupt, do not try to reassure him. They just listen, and the silence suggests they understand the seriousness of what he is saying. Elvis warns them that some truths are dangerous, that asking too many questions or pushing too hard for answers could put them at risk. And he asks them to protect each other and his family, to remember that the official story, whatever it ends up being, may not be the whole story, but challenging it publicly could bring consequences they are not prepared to handle. And this request, delivered in a low and steady voice, feels less like advice and more like a final instruction, something he needs them to agree to before the tape stops rolling. He also tells them to trust their instincts, to notice when things do not add up, to be aware of who is asking questions and why. And he says that if anything happens to him, they should not assume it was an accident or simply the result of his lifestyle. But they should also not try to investigate, not try to prove anything, because the people involved are too powerful, too protected. And the truth, even if uncovered, would not bring justice, only more danger. Listeners say this section is the hardest to hear, not because of what Elvis reveals, but because of the resignation in his voice, the acceptance that he is trapped in a situation with no good outcome, and that the best he can do is try to keep the people he loves from being pulled down with him. And when the tape finally ends, it does so abruptly in mid-thought, as if he either ran out of things he could safely say or simply could not continue. Experts react to what they hear. Audio specialists brought in to authenticate the recording confirm that the tape is genuine, that the voice is undeniably Elvis Presley, and that the recording date, based on magnetic degradation patterns and the type of cassette used, aligns with 1977, specifically the months leading up to his death in August, and these technical confirmations eliminate the possibility of modern fabrication, leaving experts to grapple with the content itself rather than its legitimacy. Historians who have spent decades studying Elvis's life admit that the tone of this recording does not match anything else in the known archive. Not the rambling phone calls, not the backstage recordings, not even the private moments captured by friends, and they describe listening to it as deeply unsettling because it presents a version of Elvis that contradicts the familiar narrative of a man destroyed by fame and excess, instead revealing someone who sounds trapped, monitored, and afraid of forces beyond his control. Psychologists analyzing the tape point to clear indicators of sustained psychological pressure. Not the scattered paranoia of substance abuse, but the focused fear of someone living under real threat. And they note the coherence of his warnings, the specificity of his self-censorship, the way he modulates his voice when approaching sensitive topics, all behaviors consistent with someone who has been trained or conditioned to protect information, and who understands the consequences of breaking that silence. Former intelligence analysts, some speaking off the record, say the structure of what Elvis describes, the vague references to being useful, to moving information, to being trusted in sensitive environments, fits patterns of informal asset recruitment common during the Cold War when celebrities were occasionally used for their access and mobility. And while no official records confirm Elvis's involvement in any covert operations, the absence of documentation, they note, would be expected in such arrangements. The reactions from those who have heard the tape range from skepticism to deep unease, but almost no one who listens all the way through dismisses it entirely. Because whatever Elvis was involved in, whatever he feared, the emotion in his voice is real, the warnings are genuine, and the feeling that he knew more than he could safely say lingers long after the tape ends. Why this changes, the Elvis story. The tape does not provide concrete proof of any specific conspiracy. It does not name agencies or officials. It does not outline operations or missions. And in that sense, it leaves much of the Elvis mystery intact. But what it does do, and what makes it so significant, is force a complete reframing of his final year. No longer can his paranoia be dismissed as the delusions of a drug-addled mind. No longer can his obsession with law enforcement badges and federal credentials be written off as harmless eccentricity. Biographers are now revisiting moments that seemed strange at the time, but were never fully explained. The sudden trips to Washington, the private meetings with officials that had no clear purpose, the way Elvis seemed to have access to people and places that should have been far beyond the reach of an entertainer. And in light of the tape, these moments take on new meaning, suggesting a hidden layer to his life that was carefully kept separate from his public image. The relentless touring in 1977, which has always been attributed to financial desperation and Colonel Parker's mismanagement, now also reads as something else, a need to keep moving, to stay visible, to avoid being alone or stationary for too long, and Elvis's physical decline during this period, rather than being just the result of pills and exhaustion. Fans and researchers are also reconsidering the circumstances of his death, not jumping to conspiracy theories, but simply acknowledging that the official narrative, a heart attack brought on by years of abuse, may be incomplete, and that Elvis himself, on this tape, seemed to believe his life was in danger from sources that had nothing to do with his health. And while the tape does not prove foul play, it does prove that Elvis feared it, that he lived his final months feeling watched, used, and trapped. What emerges from the tape is not a new definitive story, but a shadow version of the familiar one, a life that ran parallel to the public spectacle, and the realization that Elvis may have gone down not just as a fallen star, but as a frightened man who knew too much and had no safe way to tell anyone. A tape that refuses to explain itself. The recording ends without resolution, without answers, without the clarity that people crave when confronted with mysteries surrounding someone as famous as Elvis Presley. And this lack of closure is perhaps the most frustrating and haunting aspect of the tape, because it gives just enough to disturb, just enough to suggest hidden depths, but not enough to confirm anything beyond the fear in Elvis's voice and the weight of secrets he could not fully share. No names are spoken, no agencies identified, no operations described in detail, and this vagueness, whether intentional or necessary, leaves the tape open to interpretation. Some hear it as evidence of covert involvement, others as the rambling of a man under extreme stress, and still others as something in between. A partial truth delivered by someone too afraid to say more. And the ambiguity ensures that the debate will continue, that the tape will be analyzed and reanalyzed, that theories will multiply rather than resolve. What cannot be debated is the authenticity of Elvis's fear, the reality of his belief that he was being watched, that he had been used, that his cooperation with powerful people had cost him his freedom and possibly his safety, and whether that belief was based on actual covert involvement, or simply the paranoia of a man losing control of his life. The emotional truth of the recording is undeniable. This is a man in crisis, a man who feels trapped, a man saying goodbye. The tape forces a question that refuses to go away, not what happened to Elvis, but what was done to him, what was asked of him, what he agreed to or was coerced into, and whether the price of fame, in his case, included obligations that went far beyond music and movies, obligations that followed him into the final exhausted months of his life. And so, the tape sits now in the archive, digitized and preserved, a document that explains nothing and changes everything. A voice from 1977 that sounds more frightened than any stage performance ever suggested, and a reminder that even the most public lives can contain rooms no one else is allowed to enter. Secrets that die with the people who carry them, unless, just once, in the middle of the night, someone presses record.